Well, even for the brave Superman, I gotta do it. Tristle, trestle, trestle, drone. Time for this one to come home.
Gee, Mr. Wizard, looks like I made a mess out of things again.
Always, always I tell you, Tudor, be just what you is, not what you is not. Folks what you is as the happiest lot.
Greetings, fellow travelers, explorers, independent thinkers, and seekers, and welcome to the Nexus. Jeff Harmon is back to talk about spirits and souls in astrology. Grab your favorite libation, settle in, and enjoy the ride. Main engine ignition in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And welcome to the Nexus Nextcast with our guest, Jeff Harmon. And as you have noticed, Jeff is a regular guest on the Nexus because there's just so much to talk about, so much to get down into the depths and the breadth of astrology and how it can unveil a number of things that cause us all to raise an eyebrow, to furrow a brow, and to ponder the possibilities that we encounter as we look around all of this incredible stuff that we encounter on a daily basis, both within and without. And hell, the things that we encounter without are strange enough. But one of the most important things that we all try to sort out and look for information and delineation on is souls and spirits and just what they mean. So today, Jeff is going to give us some enlightening information about spirits and souls in astrology. What does it mean? What are they? What are these energies? What are these components of our personality that make us who we are, both here and after here, and then the return to here later on? One of the things I've noticed as we've looked at the different things with Jeff in astrology is it seems that, and Jeff, you can correct me where I'm wrong here, but it seems as though that once we come here, we seem to have a propensity to revisit here in bringing with us our souls and or spirits.
Yeah, we certainly can, yeah.
So what do you have to say about souls and spirits and astrology, Mr. Harmon?
Well, that's a deep, deep subject and one that I approach with much humility and trepidation. And I guess the other word I would use would be respect. I love, you and I were talking before the show, and we have so much fun, Robert. We just have a blast. And I wish we could record half the stuff we say before the show. And then, it would even be more fun. But you and I were talking, the outtakes, yeah. I love that we were speaking about one of my favorite cartoons. And if anybody hasn't seen it, it's called Mr. Wizard. And of course, you used it for the opening of the show because I sent it to you and said, hey, you got to check this out. You knew all about it because you and I both grew up in the same era. And Mr. Wizard was a great analogy for the show because it's all about this little turtle that gets sent through the time tunnel. And Mr., he'll go in and he'll become a taxi cab driver. He'll become some type of worker, and then everything will get all screwed up. And then he'll go, Mr. Wizard, Mr. Wizard. Weasel Tom, time for this one to come home. And he spins him through the time tunnel and he comes back. Well, I love that because the writers of the first Matrix, the Wachowski brothers, actually used that line. Keanu Reeves was running, if you remember, Agent Smith's chasing him, shooting at the watermelons as he's running through New York, right? Trying to get to the phone so he can get back in the Nebuchadnezzar. And he says on the cell phone, Mr. Wizard, get me out of here. And I went, oh my God. I said, they knew about Mr. Wizard. So one of my favorite cartoons, and it's very analogous to what I personally believe we're doing here on Earth. I always call Earth the soul cauldron. And it sure seems to be, we have this diversity of experience in life, not only in human life, but the myriad of animal life, plant life, mineral, etc. A lot of people don't think minerals are referred to as something that's living, but it's interesting. Quantum physicists and many others are saying, hey, everything seems to be vibrating, energetic life on this planet. And I really believe that that's true. In fact, many of your very spiritual prophets and mystics have always said the planet's alive. You know, what I love is I'm going to share the screen if you don't mind. Can I do that?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. One of my favorite, you and I were talking about all kinds of stuff before the show, but one of my favorite little diagrams, and this is, I'm going to go back to this one again, which is the tree of life. I think it's a great model to talk about souls. And there's 4 worlds. There's so many ways you can talk about this. The world, it's pronounced different ways, but I'll pronounce it absolute, which means you could also, that's almost synonymous with absolute. This is the highest and most divine world. And they say there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions. And it's believed that human souls are created somewhere right up in here. These are on the tree of life referred to as sephirotes, which is, you could say, divine containment vessels of energy. There's no astrology up here. There's no rotating galaxies. There's no matter as humans or maybe science would categorize it. And then this next world down, which is often pronounced Bria or Braya, some people pronounce it differently. And excuse me, there again is 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions. It's way, 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 way down here in the world called Yetzirah. This is called the world of formation. In fact, I forgot to mention, absolute could be paralleled to as divinity. Braya is creation, Yetzirah is formation, and Asaya, which is the lower worlds, is referred to as the world of action. And notice that you have another tree of life between the earth and the next dimensions up. They say there's 49 dimensions with 49 subdimensions in each one of these. So you can see that there's hundreds of dimensions above Earth, literally. And if our soul is believed to be created up here, it really begs to ponder that, wow, we are moving down here into this solar system. In fact, they say the Milky Way and the solar system as we know it here is way down here, just to give you an idea of the vastness. In fact, the whole worlds of Yetzirah is where they believe the universe is, or parallel universes, and our universe is, and all the rotating galaxies. So you begin to get a picture of how vast these diagrams are. It's almost incomprehensible. In fact, it certainly is when you take it all in. So if the universe is three-dimensionally as we know it, are contained in Yetzirah alone, which is, again, formation, which is very, very interesting. So where does astrology fit into all this? And souls, well, if our souls are believed to be created up here, and I personally believe that they are, and astrology, or the firmaments in the Bible, if you will, or all referred to in many different religious disciplines, don't form until down here. My God, the possibility of our souls sojourning not only on this planet, but many, many other dimensions as well as worlds is entirely possible.
So in this model, where does the soul originate? And then, if I'm assuming it's at the top level there, or in the second level,
it's believed to be up here,
which is right at there at the top level at the
right. See, each of these little spheres actually has a very specific name. We had gotten into that before, and again, the Kabbalah is a great way to talk about. That's called Keter. People do pronounce that, which is often likened to the archangel Metatron. Many people have heard of that, and you can see there's a god name here called Eheye. So this is, again, notice white is the color, frankincense. So this is a very divine, high energy. It's believed to be the first place that God coalesces, if you will, into what we would call some and then Hokum means wisdom. See, you could see if we zoom out here, and this is analogous to the human body. We are believed to be in the image of God, or you could say that we're created like that. That's why I love Mr. Wizard, because Mr. Wizard is like the cartoon that epitomizes almost exactly what life is like. It's like and this is what's fascinating. There's texts, and you can't make this stuff up. They say there's texts. Well, not they say there's dimensions that are above the celestial world of, you could say, the firmament. Most astrologers will concede that we pretty much use the solar system and fixed stars, right, to see what happens to a soul when it's born on Earth. That's what astrology is all about. And what's fascinating about all this is that above what we would call the firmament, there appears to be a sephirot called Hokum, which is known as wisdom. And in that, it's actually stated in many texts that there is angels that actually work in concert with the journey of the soul and pick when we're incarnated. So modern astrologers are all running around saying, oh, you're a Pisces or an Aries. And I'm like, no, you're a spiritual being having a physical experience. It's the exact opposite. You probably got the time, the parents, the astrology, and the cycles that you're getting commensurate with the journey that your soul is on, and also the karma. Because when you look at some of the more ancient philosophies, again, in Jyotisha, and I have to go to the amazing rich depth of Vedic astrology. Most people call it Vedic astrology, but Vedic astrology really takes you down the rabbit hole. If you really want to use the analogy of Mr. Wizard here, the theme of the show, there's several types of branches in Jyotisha. One is Parashara, that was named after Maharishi Parashara, and then, of course, Maharishi Jaimini. And then there's Nadi astrology, which I know is exceedingly old. And then there's Tajika. All of these refer to the soul incarnate in the physical body. You can actually see this is a plate out of the Bhagavad Gita, which shows the life force energy, karmas, and spirit energy going on and on and on over the hills. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So amazing. So what's I think so prolific about this is not only does Vedic astrology talk about reincarnation, which again, the church threw that baby out the window with the bathwater somewhere, and there's a lot of dispute about this, but somewhere between the 2nd and 5th centuries, there's all kinds of dispute whether the Nicene councils did it or somebody else did it. But one thing's for certain, if you and I have talked a lot about one of my favorite mystics in modern times, which of course was Skelos, who's spoken about in the book The Magus of Strovolos. For anybody who wants to read a book about souls and dimensions, ghosts and spirits and consciousness and layers of the aura, this is certainly a great introductory to it. The Magus of Strovolos.
Recommended that book to me 2 years ago.
I love this book.
And it took me, well, it took 2 months to get halfway through it because of the amount of information. I'd read a page or two and I'd just have to put it down and absorb it. It was just a fascinating read.
It really is. It's an amazing, amazing book. And again, the stuff that he could do, this man could go in and heal cancerous cells. He could reconstruct what he calls the etheric double, which is a very great analogy. Around our auric field, allopathic medicine is really great at detecting diseases and categorizing them scientifically. But what I think allopathic medicine really falls short on is the root causes. And this is where people in Reiki, people with Chinese medicine, and of course Skelos and great healers all know that it's imbalances within the etheric double. Proof of it is there is no cure for cancer, but yet he could reconstruct bones, and there were doctors that looked at all kinds of things and said, "Oh my God, how did you do that? We have an X-ray here, 3 days ago, and you just rebuilt this person's spine. That's virtually impossible." So
yeah, I look at cancer as something that is just an imbalance within the cells. So a cure is not necessarily a cure; it's rebalancing the energy within.
Rebalancing, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So back to the topic at hand, Vedic astrology is just astounding. You and I were talking before the show, and I was saying there's so many great, people. This is actually John F. Kennedy's chart. I don't know why I put Robert in there, because you and I were talking about Robert. But it's actually, this is John F. Kennedy, which of course we all know is the very famous president who was brutally murdered and shot. What's interesting about Vedic astrology is, notice these right here. These are called the Jaimini Karakas, which are the soul indicators. And notice right here, AK actually stands for the Atma Karaka, which is the soul indicator. And what's fascinating is John F. Kennedy had Mercury as his soul indicator. And what's interesting about these Karakas is they really show the force that was behind and the type of energy that the personality would even exhibit. John F. Kennedy had also something known as the Amatea Karaka. It's kind of and do realize some people pronounce these differently, but that's how I pronounce it. So, and I abbreviate it, just call it AK and the AMK. The Amatea Karaka is like the prince of the soul. It's like kind of the king's advisor, or the president's advisor is what it is, but it's your advisor. And what's interesting is John F. Kennedy rose meteorically to the presidency right when he hit a dosha in Vedic astrology that was favoring his soul indicator and the prince of his soul, if you will, the AK and the AMK. You can see here on the screen. And notice, interestingly, how he also left. And wasn't he Mars rules violence, guns, and the eighth house? If you, in Vedic astrology, this is the eighth house. The eighth house is also the house of death. He was also killed right during that same time in 1963, which you and I both remember. I'll never forget that day. I was standing out on the lawn, and the AM radio, remember the old tube AM radios? You know, John F. Kennedy was just killed in Dallas, Texas today. And I'm like, wow, you know, I was just a kid. I'm sure you were too. Yeah. But, you know, it's interesting. You can't make this stuff up, how accurately the soul indicators in astrology indicate these things. And you know, like Robert Mitchum, which is one of my more favorite actors. Many people, if you study Robert Mitchum, he was such an unusual guy, but what a great actor. They often say he's one of the top Hollywood golden era actors that never got the full credit that he deserved. And the same thing, if you look at Robert Mitchum, his soul indicator was also Mercury, right in the ascendant. And Robert's always been associated with being a tough dude, you know, being a tough guy. And notice he's got Sun and Leo right in the ascendant. And what's interesting is these are the 9th divisional numerological charts called Navamshas. And it's really interesting, the number 9. And look at this. Both his soul indicator and his prince of his soul are really powerful in this chart. I mean, exceedingly powerful. So back to souls, it really shows in the ancient, there's nothing to me like the Kabbalah and the Vedantic parallels that you can put together. It's so amazing. One of the favorite diagrams that I always like to refer to, and this is in a text known as the Shar-Ar Hagilgam. Shar-Ar is also gate, and Hagilgam means recycling or circling. And of course, it is referred to as the gate of reincarnations. This is actually a more recent text from the 15th century, but it mirrors many, many of the ancient Egyptian and Vedantic references to the soul, which I think have gotten fragmented in the mists of time. And what's so valuable is this particular book actually seeks to put the soul into categorical, nice little neat boxes, if you will. Like the nefesh is a Hebrew or Aramaic word, if you will, that could be related to the modern term of psyche. It's your personality, right? It's the lower nefesh. The rosh is the spirit. It's also parallel with breath and the forces that are keeping the heart beating and all the magical things that science knows is true. I mean, you can go to a doctor and he'll tell you if your heart's beating right or not, but they don't know why. And yes, they can say, oh, it's the muscles in the heart and it's the neurological impulses that are coming from somewhere in the brain. Okay, fine, guys. But when the heart stops, you can smack a new one in there, but when the spirit vacates the body, you can't replace it. They can put your new heart in, but they can't replace your spirit. When the spirit goes,
they really
you're
don't
dead.
I think that spirit and soul kind of fall into that same definition or category.
Well, they certainly were more open to it, I'll say that. Though there are a lot of people today in science that I'll say, like Claude Swanson, certainly one of them.
Yes.
There's many out there that are beginning to open up to the possibility that hard science has to integrate this stuff. And again, quantum physicists and I always loved IONS, which is the Institute of Noetic Sciences with Edgar Mitchell, who I had the great honor of speaking at, was a really open crowd, a lot of smart people who are saying, hey, that there's something far, far beyond. Everyone believes that. That's why I think a lot of people today are either seeking more out of their religion or they're also seeking to find something past their religion. And the ancient world certainly has a lot to offer if you get in the right places. The Sharia Gilgamesh is amazing. And notice, not once you get past Rosh, this is called Neshma. Now, here's what's interesting. There's a parallel here to the tree of life. It's a little bit hidden in this diagram, but Malachus means earth. This is the moon. That is Venus. That's Mercury. That's the sun. This is Jupiter. That's Mars. And guess what Binya is? Binya is known as Saturn. Saturn is the escape from Alcatraz planet. And where the soul is. And that brings me to one of my more favorite diagrams to always show, and that is this one right here. This big, thick dashed line is the demarcation between what modern psychology might call the conscious mind below here, and this up above could also be likened to the so-called Freudian model of the subconscious mind. Mm-hmm. And interesting to bring up Freud, because Freud and Jung had a real falling out right around, I think it was about 1913 or thereabouts. Jung, they're just discovering how much Carl Jung had written. There's documents that haven't even been published that he wrote. He was quite a mystic, and he was really into spiritualism, to astrology and the analogy, and of course that really had Freud had a big problem with that, and that really caused a lot of dissension. In fact, they literally had it out and went their separate ways. But why I bring all that up is because psychology and psychiatry fits quite nicely into astrology. And again, I've had the blessing of having a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists who I do astrology for. And we just love delving into the depths of the psyche and the mind and the spirit and the soul and talking about all these things. And again, one of my favorite doctors to ever, and I would again encourage anyone who wants to go down the rabbit hole on spirits and souls and ghosts and all that stuff, please read 30 Years Among the Dead by Dr. Carl Wicklund. That book, this is the original one that I got. I was very lucky to get that copy. It's not available anymore, but now it's been re-released in a new cover and design and republished. But basically, this is a very hardcore psychiatrist who I think he graduated in 1918 in Chicago, Illinois. And he absolutely did not believe in anything spiritual, did not believe about souls and spirits. It's all hogwash, right? And he actually had a lot of paranormal experiences that he just brushed off with science. Well, here's the interesting thing about this book. He's the guy who actually popularized, and I think he was the one who utilized for the first time the Windham generator, which today everyone will know as shock therapy treatment. Not fun stuff. It's pretty brutal stuff.
Well, speaking of shock, we've come to the end of the first segment, and I am shocked because it just goes by so quickly. So,
all right, Mr. Wizard.
We will take a short intermission, and we will return. And welcome back to the Nexus Nextcast for segment 2 with our guest today, Jeff Harman, the cosmological consultant, the astrologer of that which is. And today we're talking about spirits and souls in astrology and how this amazing set of knowledge, this cosmological language, can help us understand this mysterious two components of our existence that we typically refer to as souls and spirits. In the first segment, Jeff gave us some of the Kabbalistic interpretations and models in which where the souls are created, how they tumble down into the materium as we incarnate into these existing manifestations of our carbon-based units. And in the second segment, we're going to get into a little bit more of some examples of some historical figures, which we touched on briefly in the first segment, and about how their charts and how their souls manifested into what we have seen as their historical references and the information that we have, but a little bit deeper down into what Mr. Wizard would say. Oh, twizzle, twazzle, twazzle, twom. It's time for this one to come home. So with that, Jeff, I don't know what you're going to do with that, but I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, I'm going to jump back to share here real quick so that we can now look at some things here back to the model that we were talking about. We left off on Dr. Carl Wicklund, who, again, I love Wicklund's work because, as we had mentioned, he was the one who popularized shock therapy treatment. And then later, I'll finish the story real quick. Dr. Wicklund came to the Los Angeles County Mental Institution in the late teens, early 20s. It's in the book if I'm misquoting. And he was basically doing all kinds of work with shock therapy treatment and psychiatric patients that were having schizophrenia and all kinds of various different conditions that caused them to be incarcerated. Well, as fate would have it, he met a woman at a Hollywood party that he fell in love with, became smitten with her. And when he married her, he found out she was a psychic channel. Now, this is a guy who found that this was completely opposite of what he believed in. So he pursued finding out whether or not she was nuts, right? He did a very scientific analysis of, okay, is my wife crazy? Is she really channeling spirits or is she not? Well, in the book, why the morbid title, 30 Years Among the Dead, is he found out to his amazement that there was someone in his wife's body who he had just done shock therapy treatment, and the person said, "You're the one who's been shocking me with this lightning." And he says, "Well, what do you mean?" And the person proceeded to describe a shock therapy treatment that went completely awry a few days earlier, that there's no way they could have known had they not been there. He says, "Well, you had to have been there. You couldn't have known that this and this and this happened." And he said, "Well, of course I was there." And he says, "Well, it looks like you're controlling my wife's body." He says, "Do you wear a wedding ring and a dress?" And he says, "Oh, of course not." And he looked down and, "Oh my God, you're right, I am." So he says, "Well, apparently you're deceased or dead, as we might call it." And this, after he cleared this guy and got him to realize his condition, clearing is another synonym that you could say was getting him to realize he was dead. And again, for anyone who wants to read this stuff, read the Magus of Strovolos. You'll be blown away with the descriptions in there. So anyways, yeah, oh yeah, it's amazing. So what's interesting is Wicklund found that the patient that was attached, that he did the shock therapy treatment on, cleared up. And she was actually released from the mental institution a very short time later. And that's why the next 30 years, he documented with great accuracy all these different disincarnate people that we would call ghosts or call dead. In this book, it's 30 years literally of documented people who had lives, who had ended up into the astral realms, which brings me back, and that's just one book. There's some other great books that I love too that I could refer you to. Malachi Martin is another one, A Hostage to the Devil. Dr. Edith Fiore, and here's an entire manual here that's written by Dr. William Baldwin, who is passed away now. He actually has a whole manual on spirit releasement therapy that I would encourage people to peruse if they're interested in this subject. Interesting stuff. But back to the model we were talking about before, there is very specific references. And, many people who are familiar with this may find there's different nomenclature or ways to say this, but this is called the sublunar world, which in the ancient Kabbalah and the Egyptian and Vedantic lore is what we call the slingshot of the souls. And it is quite interesting, the documentation that exists, particularly in the Kabbalah, where when we exit the body, a lot of the karmic energy causes the angelic forces that guide the soul to, what we would say, kind of ping the soul out into the wilderness. There's a lot more meaning to the biblical references of Israel was cast to the wilderness. Well, that wilderness might just be the 49 dimensions that are existent in the astral planes between the earth and the sublunar worlds. And this is the world of ghosts, of spirits, of ascension of spirits and moving up and down, the so-called Gehenna and hell and purification areas that are all connected with this.
Let me ask you this. I want to make sure there's that at least I understand and our listeners can have a better understanding. What is the delineation between a spirit and a soul?
Boy, that is a really great question. And this is vast topics. I think, the better model to talk about this, at least some way to get our minds around this, is the nefesh could be likened to the present personality and also the lower portion of the psyche. Again, using that analogy that we had before, and I only use these diagrams is because they're a way to talk about this. The so-called present personality is the sense of egoic self. And of course, we see this in modern society. Of course, today more than ever. I mean, everyone is polarized with their political views and their religious views and their self-righteousness. I mean, we're probably seeing right now with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that's happening this January, more dissension and polarization than we've seen in a hell of a long time.
Indeed.
Certainly brings me back to the days of Munich and Germany when World War II was going on and World War I. It was just a very trying time from everything I've heard. It was before both of our times, but when you look back in history, it's very similar. That was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction that triggered all that too. So the soul is actually believed to be much higher than the spirit. And there's a lot of very mysterious stuff. You and I were talking about Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin before the show. And a lot of people, if they ever want to go look at a Led Zeppelin concert, will actually see Jimmy Page brazenly put on his amplifier one of the goetic spirits or demons, if you will, which is to do with the Shem Hamaphorish. The Shem Hamaphorish is a strange term that is used that everyone knows about because in their Bibles they have something known as the Exodus in the Old Testament. Exodus is, among many things, also has a section where there are 72 angels delineated in what we call ciphers and permutations. And for anybody that's interested, here's a little excerpt on what we call ciphers and all that I actually put together. Ciphers are codes that are used. You can see these are ciphers in the Hebrew and, of course, in the Aramaic. And there are a lot to this. Here's another example. Benjamin Franklin was probably one of the most prolific creators of what we call magical squares, and the Rosicrucians and the Kabbalists, and also in Sanskrit, I may add, there are ciphers and codes where things are encrypted. You can see here on the right, these are the 22 Hebraic ciphers that are used. There's only 18 here, but there's actually 22 total on the next page. I just didn't include it in this particular plate. And there are ways to pass verses in the Psalms and in the scriptures, and in the Old Testament particularly, through these ciphers, and you will actually get a numerological equivalent to another name. So these are known as ciphers. And there's, you could spend a lifetime on this and never fully understand it. But why I mention all this stuff is because the soul is believed to be broken into many layers. First, you have the divinity of the soul, which some people pronounce that Yechida, or they pronounce it with kind of a K instead of the CH. And this is supposed to be exceedingly divine. And then you have Hokma, which means wisdom. And this is the wisdom of the soul. And then you have the Neshma, which is, again, kind of the knowledge of the soul, or the part that is more dense and integrating all the lifetimes. See, the Nefesh is the psyche, the Rosh is the spirit, and this is kind of the wisdom of the soul.
So it sounds like the soul is the more cosmic, eternal energy, and within the soul is where the spirit manifests. Does that sound right? Or
Yeah. That's one way of looking at it. I mean, this stuff is so complex, and I don't sit here claiming to have all the answers. But my research so far, I would say, that's an analogy that could certainly be used. The present personality, or the incarnate self. We all have our sense of self. We all have our names and our jobs and our badges and our families, or whatever we have, our stuff.
Our sentience of self, being aware.
It's like George Carlin said, your stuff. Where are you going to put all your stuff? Remember that? So this is our stuff portion of the sense of reality, or you could say in psychology, it's our sense of being and separateness. And they actually say the skin of the body is very analogous to the auric field. The skin actually is the physical barrier of the physical body, but they say it's the same thing on the what we call next layer up, the etheric double, where the skin of the soul, or the spirit, is also intermixed with negative and positive forces. And this is where you got to go back to the biblical references. And the same thing happens in the Vedantic as well as the Egyptian. And that is, we have been mixed. They say birth and death are a purification and rectification of the soul, which is very fascinating stuff. In fact, you can see, again, it's hard in a short show like this to get into this vast of a topic. But one of the, I think, better analogies here, let me see if I can find it here, is in the Upanishads. They actually speak directly, if I can find the right talk here. Here we go. In the Upanishads, they actually speak specifically about the layers of the soul. And the Tatriyaka is one of them. They actually talk again about the 5 layers of the soul. Now, here's a culture completely separate from the Kabbalah, and yet comes up with the same analogies to the layers of the soul. And again, going back to this diagram, it is the 5 layers of the soul. So again, no matter what you call them, there seems to be some pretty unanimous agreements in various cultures, at least the ones that are intact and more advanced, like the Vedantic, the Egyptian, and of course the Kabbalistic, where we have these layers of the soul. Well, interestingly enough, Saturn is Binya. If you take these words out, you have all the celestial counterparts that are paralleling human incarnation on the earth. And nowhere have I seen it as explicit and amazing as I have in Jyotisha, which is, again, Vedic astrology, if you will, and also what we would call the Jaimini Karakas, which are literally the labels of the soul. Like, you could tell your spouse, you could tell children whether you're ever going to have them or not. You can tell all of these karakas, even though they're abbreviations, represent various, like the Dara Karaka, which is the abbreviated DK, will tell you if you're going to have a marriage or more than one. And it's amazing stuff. You can really delve into this. So the astrology is in almost kind of a map in what we would call time of unfoldment of different events. And I mean, again, you know, I've gone through so many celebrities and so many people that you just can't make this stuff up. You know, it's every soul is different. There's not a single one of us the same. And when they talk about souls, they say there's literally billions of fragments, billions upon billions of fragments of souls. The analogy was, and this kind of goes back to the Adam and Eve story, and there's even souls pre-Adamic. And that's why I love some of the ancient rabbinical texts, because it wasn't fertilized with dogma yet. It was just divine knowledge that they had.
So if we look at, again, the delineation between the soul and the spirit, it sounds as though there are, according to this information and these teachings, there are multiple layers, and should we call them frequencies, of the soul. And within that stack, if you will, of frequencies that defines the soul for any given individual, the spirit is one of those frequencies, and the spirit is part of what manifests in our self-awareness, our sentience, sense of self, and ergo our personality and ego. Is that in the ball?
That's a great analogy. Yeah. In fact, Skelos, the Magus of Strovolos, says a really wonderful thing that parallels what you just said, and that is these present personalities or incarnations are not only purification and rectifications, like the rabbinical texts say, but they are experiences in the material realm of Earth. And I think there's many other places where we have material experiences. But I believe that these, in fact, that's a great analogy, because they say, notice this is the present personality below this big thick dashed line. Well, now notice Saturn operates just above this. I call Saturn the karmic gunny sack. Notice it says karma and tikkun. And we always tend to go, oh, karma's bad. Well, you could have good karma too. It's just experiences of the soul and how pure the soul is. And then they say all these incarnations, these present personalities, reabsorb into the collective incarnations here. And this is one theory at least. And then at some point in time, it reabsorbs up into the divinity of the soul, which is the highest level of the soul. You'll actually notice these names right here parallel this diagram that I had before. See these same names.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you get used to the system, it's our finite minds trying to wrap around something this abstract and this profound.
Trying to put some distinction into the way in which the cosmos and the various frequencies and energies and vibrations manifest. And just a quick note for those of you that are listening on the Odyssey network and on the various podcast platforms where you are enjoying the audio version of this, I highly encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, which is the Nexus Nextcast, and you can also find it under Professor Bower, which is a moniker that I've been given by many listeners, and you'll find the video version of what we're talking about here, where these charts and graphs that Jeff is sharing just give a whole different dimension visually to the concepts that we're talking about, and how these frequencies and these vibrations, at least in some of the teachings and some of the knowledge that's been passed down through millennia, have defined and described this material and etheric realm of reality, if you will, that we all inhabit. It's very interesting because there is a hierarchical structure, and there is an integrative intersectionality, if you will, of the ways in which these different teachings and thought about how reality manifests through the cosmos, through this interactive consciousness. It's very profound, it's very deep, and it can be very complex, but once you understand the outline and the structure and the way in which these teachings have described the consciousness, the soul, the spirit, the elementals, the various levels and degrees of which all these different entities that people have encountered throughout either readings or throughout their own personal experience. It's really profound, and it does give a sense of continuity to the way in which some of these paranormal things that, for example, our good friend Rocky Stucci and his some of his friends go out and follow, looking for some of these paranormal manifestations, and this gives some definition, some explanation of the ways in which some of these spirits can kind of get caught in between, or on a more normal iterative cycle, we all transition from birth to death and then go through that cycle again. So just a little bit of a long-winded way of saying, go to the YouTube channel, look at the charts that Jeff is talking about, and it'll give you a much better sense and orientation to some of these concepts that really do provide an explanation that is beyond. Of course, science doesn't even bother touching these subjects because it's non-material in the sense.
Don't even want to hear about it.
Yep. They can't put a mathematical formula to it to describe it. So this is
Impossible.
very, very, very important and deep information that I encourage everyone to, again, go to the YouTube channel, take a look at these charts. There's a lot more to come. So with that, Jeff, go back to
where you. Well, a lot of these charts I've assembled. This chart here I actually assembled from kind of an amalgam of charts, trying to simplify this because you're right. It's trying to come up with something definitive or scientific in a model is nearly impossible. But another thing that really attracts me as well, and this is another part of the research that I love to do, is some of the. And the Shar HaGilgam gets into this. And believe me, the churches, our forefathers in Rome were definitely exposed to this stuff. I think they chose to ignore it. And I'm not here to bash the religions, but some of them need bashing. Where they
smacking around, that's for sure.
They need to be smacked like a redheaded stepchild. But the reason why is because they omitted so much stuff and just introduced in its place dogma and fear, whereas knowledge empowers, or at least awareness. And I'm certainly not sitting here saying, oh, this is it, because anyone who says that I think is really wrong. But I'm in an explorational mode, and that's what I like about you and I being able to do this stuff without the dogma. We're just saying, okay, this is some existent texts. I've had the blessing of looking at these texts and analogies of the soul and the spirit and the psyche and seeing, okay, does astrology hold any water with this stuff? And I have to say, my God, it certainly does. I mean, I like to look at, because we all like famous people. And again, when I looked at Robert Mitchum's chart, I just went, oh my God, this fits this guy to the T. He even, when he got in Hopalong Cassidy, it even showed the yogas in his chart released. And I do this for a lot of readings of people where they'll say, well, I've been really trying to make it and it's not happening. And I'm like, well, it's not gonna until about here. And I don't want to make that a self-fulfilling prophecy. And sometimes you can actually see when people might consider realigning their direction in life more parallel to the energies that are existent. Not that I don't believe in positive thinking and that I don't believe free will is there, because it certainly is. And can you change it through will itself? I believe you can alter it significantly, but I don't think you can make a Ferrari become a Volkswagen. It's just the way it is.
The other way around. I mean, there's a lot
or the other way around, right?
To take a Volkswagen Beetle and turn it into a Ferrari. And with that, we've got 1 minute left here at the end of this show. And as you were mentioning, Jeff, getting into being able to utilize this information in readings is one of the most profound things that I personally have experienced.
It helps. It helps a lot
in the last 6 years. So with that, Jeff, please tell everyone where they can find you and take advantage of the information and the services that you provide along these lines so that people can really find out more of what they need to know.
Yeah, well, thanks, Robert. The best way is Jeff at jeffharman.com, HARMAN.com, Jeff at jeffharman.com. But yeah, I really enjoy it. I really feel blessed and privileged to be able to research this material. It's kind of interesting where my life ended up, I find it very fascinating to study these ancient texts. And one last thing I'd like to say is, and this is so far beyond astrology, there are purifications and rectifications on the soul using permutations of prayers that are so secret and so amazing. One who left us much of this stuff was a man named Rabbi Chaim Vittel. He was also known as the Ari. And Luria, they were both student and teacher, and there's a lot to that. So pardon me if I'm not saying which one in the correct order. But the texts actually are encrypted in Exodus and in many of the Western biblical secrets that have been completely omitted by the religions in the Psalms, and known as Tehillim, and also in the biblical literature, where you can actually do prayers and rectifications to purify and rectify the soul so that it is much more able to ascend as we transit this body, because we're all going to do, it's my nickname, we're all going to take the pipe, right? The pipe is when we all die. We're all going to exit this body one way or another. And nobody takes anything with us. I know I deal with so many readings where, am I going to get the money? And
I think what you just brought up about these prayers and these incantations and different ways in which to mitigate, change, influence the various energies that are naturally at play in the cycles sounds like the next show. So we're gonna have to explore that, because I'm sure a whole bunch of ears perked up and some people said, now what is that? I'd like to know some more. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today on the Nexus Nextcast, and we will be back again and next week with yet another episode with Jeff Harman, looking at what is going on within the cosmos. We are one in many and many in one. And thank you again, Mr. Harman, for joining us on the Nextcast.
I'll just say, tweezle, 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 tum. Time for these two to go home.
And that we shall do. Till next time.